Can you explain what you mean when you say that the negative externalities are coupled to an economy that depends on exponential growth?
Yeah. So it's, if you think about it just in a first principle way, the idea is supposed to be something like there are real goods and services that people want that improve their life that we care about. And so the services might not be physical goods directly. They might be things humans are doing, but they still depend upon lots of goods, right? If you are going to provide a consultation over a Zoom meeting, you have to have laptops and satellites and power lines and mining and all of those things. So you can't separate the service industry from the goods industry. So there's physical stuff that we want. And to mediate the access to that and the exchange of it, we think about it through a currency. So it's supposed to be that there's this physical stuff and the currency is a way of being able to mediate the incentives and exchange of it. But the currency starts to gain its own physics, right? So we make a currency that has no intrinsic value, that is just representative of any kind of value we could want. But the moment we do something like interest, where we're now exponentiating the monetary supply, independent of an actual automatic growth of goods or services, to not debase the value of the currency, you have to also exponentiate the total amount of goods and services. And everybody's seen how compounding interest works, right? Because you have a particular amount of interest and then you have interest on that amount of interest. So you do get an exponential curve. Obviously, that's just the beginning. Financial services as a whole and all of the dynamics where you have money making on money mean that you expand the monetary supply on an exponential curve, which was based on the idea that there is a natural exponential curve of population anyways, and there is a natural growth of goods and services correlated. But that was true at an early part of a curve that was supposed to be an S curve, right? You have an exponential curve that inflects, goes into an X curve, but we don't have the S curve part of the financial system planned. The financial system has to keep doing exponential growth or it breaks. And not only is that key to the financial system, because what does it mean to have a financial system without interest? Say it's a very deeply different system. That formalizing that was also key to our solution to not have World War III, right? The history of the world in terms of war does not look great, that the major empires and major nations don't stay out of violent conflict with each other very long. And World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars, but it wasn't. We had World War II. Now this one really has to be the war that ends all major superpower wars because of the bomb. We can't do that again. And the primary basis of wars, one of the primary bases had been resources, which was a particular empire wanted to grow and get more stuff. And that meant taking it from somebody else. And so the idea of if we could exponentially grow global GDP, everybody could have more without taking each other's stuff. It's so highly positive sum that we don't have to go zero sum on war. So the whole post-World War II banking system, the Bretton Woods monetary system, et cetera, was part of the how do we not have world war, along with mutually assured destruction, the UN, and other international intergovernmental organizations. But that let's exponentially grow the monetary system also meant that if you have a whole bunch more dollars and you don't have more goods and services, the dollars become worth less, and it's just inflation and debasing the currency. So now you have an artificial incentive to keep growing the physical economy, which also means that the materials economy has to have an exponential amount of nature getting turned from nature into stuff, into trash and pollution in a linear materials economy. And you don't get to exponentially do that on a finite biosphere forever.
So the economy is tied to interest, and that's at the root of this, of what you just explained, not at the root of every catastrophe.
Interest is the beginning of what all of the financial services do, but there's an embedded growth obligation, of which interest is the first thing you can see on the economic system. The embedded growth obligation that creates exponentiation of it tied to the physical world where exponential curves don't get to run forever is one of the problems. There are a handful. This is when we're thinking meta crisis. What are the underlying issues? This is one of the underlying issues. There's quite a few other ones that we can look at to say, if we really want to address the issues, we have to address it at this level.
What's the issue with transitioning from something that's exponential to sub-exponential when it comes to the economy?
What's the issue with it? Well, I mean, there's a bunch of ways we could go. There is an old refrain from the hippie days, and it seems very obvious, I think, as soon as anyone thinks about it, which is that you can't run an exponential growth system on a finite planet forever. That seems kind of obvious and intuitive. Because it's so obvious and intuitive, there's a lot of counters to it, right? One counter is, oh, well, we're not going to run it on a finite planet forever. We're going to become an interplanetary species, mine asteroids, ship our ways to the sun, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that we are anywhere near close, independent of the ethical or aesthetic argument on if us obliterating our planet's carrying capacity and then exporting that to the rest of the universe is a good or lovely idea or not. Independent of that argument, the timelines by which that could actually meet the humanity superorganism growing needs relative to the timelines where this thing starts failing don't work. So that's not an answer. That said, the attempt to even try to get there quicker is a utilization of resources here that is speeding up the breakdown here faster than it is providing alternatives. The other answer people have to why there could be exponential growth forever is because digital, right? That more and more money is a result of software being created, a result of digital entertainment being created, and that there's a lot less physical impact of that. And so we can keep growing digital goods because it doesn't affect the physical planet and physical supply chain. So we can keep the exponential growth up forever. That's very much the kind of Silicon Valley take on it. Of course, that has an effect. It does not solve the problem. And it's pretty straightforward to see why, which is for let's go ahead and say software in particular. Does software have to run on hardware where the computer systems and server banks and satellites and et cetera require massive mining, which also requires a financial system and police and courts to maintain the entire cybernetic system that runs all that? Yes, it does. Does a lot more compute require more of that, more atoms, adjacent services, energy? Yes. But also, for us to consider software valuable, it's either because we're engaging with what it's doing directly. So that's the case in entertainment or education or something, but then it is interfacing with the finite resource called human attention, of which there is a finite amount. Or because we're not necessarily being entertained or educated or engaging with it, but it's doing something for us to, again, to consider it valuable. It is doing something to the physical world. So the software is engaging, say, supply chain optimization or new modeling for how to make better transistors or something like that. But then it's still moving atoms around using energy in physical space, which is a finite resource. If it is not either affecting the physical world or affecting our attention, why would we value it? We don't. So it still bottoms out on finite resources. So I can't just keep producing an infinite amount of software where you get more and more content that nobody has time to watch and more designs for physical things that we don't have physical atoms for or energy for. You get a diminishing return on the value of it if it's not coupled to things that are finite, right? The value of it is in modulating things that are also finite. So there's a coupling coefficient there. You still don't get an exponential curve. So what we just did is say the old hippie refrain, you can't run an exponential economy on a finite planet forever. The counters to it don't hold.
What about mind uploading or some computer brain interface to allow us to have more attention exponentially?
Yeah. So, it's kind of that's almost like a hybrid of the other two, right? Which is get beyond this planet, and do it more digitally. So get beyond this brain, and become digital gods in a singularity universe. I think there are pretty interesting arguments we can have ethically, aesthetically, and epistemically about why that is neither possible nor desirable. But independent of those, I don't think it's anywhere close. And same like the multiplanetary species, it is nowhere near close enough to address any of the timelines we have by which economy has to change, because the growth imperative on the economy as is moving us towards catastrophic tipping points.
So if it were close, would that change your assessment, or you still have other issues?
If it were close, then we would have to say, first, that is implying that we have a good reason to think that it's possible, right? That it's possible to, and that means all the axioms that consciousness is substrate independent, that the consciousness is purely a function of compute. Strong computationalism holds that we could map the states of the brain, and or if we believe in embodied cognition, the physiology adequately to represent that informational system on some other substrate, that could operate with an amount of energy that is and substrate that's possible, blah, blah, blah. So first we have to believe that's possible. I would question literally every one of the axioms or assumptions I just said.
We're going to get to that.
We would say, is it desirable? And how do we know? How ahead of time? And now you get something very much like, how do I know that the AI is sentient? Which for the most part on all AI risk topics, whether it's sentient or not is irrelevant. Whether it does stuff is all that matters. But how do you tell if it's sentient? And all of the Chalmers P-zombie questions or whatever are actually really hard, because what we're asking is, how can we use third-person observation to infer something about the nature of first person, given the ontological difference between them? So how would we know that that future is desirable? Are there safe-to-fail tests, and what would we have to test to know it, to start making that conversion? But I don't think we have to answer any of those questions, because I don't think that anybody that is working on whole brain emulation thinks that we are close enough that it would address the timeline of the economy issues that you're addressing.
Let's attempt to address one of the questions about substrate independence. What are your views? Is consciousness something that our biological brains do, or that requires a development from an embryonic stage? Like whatever it is that produced us, there's something special about us or animals? Or is it something that can be transferred or started up, booted up from scratch into what's not us, like decidedly not us, a computer?
Okay. So this is now much more a proper theory of everything conversation than the topic that we intended for the day, which is about AI risk. So what I will do is say briefly the conclusion of my thoughts on this without actually going into it in depth, but I would be happy to explore that at some point. I think that how I come to my position on it, to try to do a kind of proper construction, takes a while. So briefly, I'll say I'm not a strong computationalist, meaning don't believe that mind, universe, sentience, qualia is purely a function of computation. I am not an emergent physicalist that believes that consciousness is an epiphenomena of non-conscious physics, that in the same way that we have weak emergence, more of a particular property through certain kind of combinatorics, or strong emergence, new properties emerging out of some type of interaction where that hadn't occurred before, like a cell respirating. Well, none of the molecules that make it up respirate. I believe in weak emergence. That happens all the time. You get more of certain qualities. It happens in metallurgy when you combine metals where the combined tensile strength or shearing strength or whatever is more than you would expect as a result of the nature of how the molecular lattices form. You get more of a thing of the same type. I believe in strong emergence, which is you get new types of things that you didn't have before, like respiration and replication out of parts, none of which do that. But those are all still in the domain of third person accessible things. The idea of radical emergence, that you get the emergence of first person out of third person, or third person out of first person, which is idealism on one side and physicalism on the other, I don't buy either of. I think that idealism and physicalism are similar types of reductionism, where they both take certain ontological assumptions to bootload their epistemology and then get self-referential dynamics. So I don't think that if a computational system gets advanced enough, automatically consciousness pops out of it. That's one. Two, I do think that the process of a system self-organizing is fundamentally connected to the nature of experience of selfness. And things that are being designed and are not self-organizing, where the boundary between the system and its environment that exchanges energy and information and matter across the boundary is a autopoietic process. I do believe that's fundamental to the nature of things that have self-other recognition. And on substrate independence, I do believe that carbon and silicon are different in pretty fundamental ways that don't orient to the same types of possibilities. And I think that that's actually pretty important to the AI risk argument. But so I'll just go ahead and say those things. I also don't think, I believe that embodied cognition in the Damasio sense is important and that a scan of purely brain states is insufficient. I also don't think that a scan of brain states is possible even in theory.
If you enjoyed this TOE clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for TOE Mail, which is again in the description and the pinned comment. You'll receive immediate access to all exclusive updates from the Theories of Everything podcast. It also helps me communicate directly with the core TOE community. You'll also receive my top 10 TOEs. Think of it as the intellectual version of Quentin Tarantino's Obsession.